he determined to take sanctuary in Westminster Abbey. So he again went thither in an omnibus, and finding that the doors were not open for morning service, he paid his twopence and went in as a sightseer. It occurred to him that he had no definite place of rest for the day, and that he should be absolutely worn out before his interview if he attempted to walk about from 10 a.m. until 10 p.m. So he sat himself down on a stone step and gazed up at the figure of William Pitt, who looked as though he had just entered the church for the first time in his life, and was anything but pleased at finding himself there. He had been sitting unmolested about 20 minutes when the verger asked him whether he shouldn't like to walk around. Mr. Harding didn't want to walk anywhere, and declined, merely observing that he was waiting for the morning service. The verger, seeing that he was a clergyman, told him that the doors of the choir were now open, and showed him into his seat. This was a great point gained. The Archdeacon would certainly not come to morning service at Westminster Abbey, even though he were in London, and here the warden could rest quietly, and when the time came, duly say his prayers. He longed to get up from his seat and examine the music books of the choristers, and the copy of the litany from which the service was chanted, to see how the little details at Westminster corresponded with those at Barchester, and whether he thought his own voice would fill the church well from the Westminster precentor's seat. There would, however, be impropriety in such meddling, and he sat perfectly still, looking up at the noble roof, and guarding against the coming fatigues of the day. By degrees 2 or 3 people entered, the very same damp old woman who had nearly obliterated him in the omnibus, or some other just like her. A couple of young ladies with their veils down, and gilt crosses conspicuous on their prayer books, an old man on crutches, a party who were seeing the Abbey and thought they might as well hear the service for their twopence as opportunity served, and a young woman with her prayer book done up in her handkerchief, who rushed in late, and in her hurried entry tumbled over one of the forms, and made such a noise that everyone, even the officiating minor canon, was startled, and she herself was so frightened by the echo of her own catastrophe that she was nearly thrown into fits of panic. Mr. Harding was not much edified by the manner of the service. The minor canon in question hurried in, somewhat late, in a surplice not of the neatest order, and was followed by a dozen choristers, who were also not as trim as they might have been. They all jostled into their places with a quick, hurried step, and the service was soon commenced. Soon commenced, and soon over. For there was no music, and time was not unnecessarily lost in the chanting. On the whole, Mr. Harding was of the opinion that things were managed better at Barchester, though even there he knew there was room for improvement. It appears to us a question whether any clergyman can go through our church service with decorum morning after morning in an immense old building, surrounded by not more than a dozen listeners. The best actors cannot act well before empty benches, and though there is, of course, a higher motive in one case than the other, still, even the best of clergymen cannot but be influenced by their audience, and to expect that a duty should be well done under such circumstances would be to require from human nature more than human power. When the 2 ladies with the gilt crosses and the old man with his crutch and the still palpitating housemaid were going, Mr. Harding found himself obliged to go too. The verger stood in his way, and looked at him, and looked at the door, and so he went. But he returned again in a few minutes, and re-entered with another twopence. There was no other sanctuary so good to him.